All ethical theories must begin from some source of value, since only grounding of value can answer endless questions of ethics. Arguments about right to respect assume these things have some intrinsic worth which everyone accepts as good. This means consequentialism. First, only states of fairness give teleological relevance to ethics. Arianson 98. Will ethics be meaningful in a world where no suffering is known to anyone? Technically, it would be possible to tell a lie, but the difference between lying and telling the truth would have no moral significance, and since any outcome is just as good, axiological orientation is necessary to give meaning to the ethical project. Teleology always is a litmus test for ethical theories. If other ethics are meaningless, and we should use consequentialism anyways. It also solves pluralism and sees regardless of specific beliefs, all values collapse to util because the ultimate grounding for all value is pain and pleasure, which means the best way to respect citizens' preferences would be to use util. Second, since government actions will inevitably lead to trade-offs between citizens, since they benefit some and harm others, the only justifiable way to resolve these conflicts is by benefiting the maximum possible number of people, since anything else would unequally prioritize one group over another. There are three impacts. A. Side constraint theories are useless for states until inevitably violate some constraint. B. It answers util index as non-consequentialist. Moral theories prevent any action, which is worse than not being able to use util, which means it outweighs their index. C. It takes out index about calculability, since governments already use util, which proves that it is possible to do so. Finally, pluralism cannot solve trade-offs. You can't decide in the case of mutually exclusive choice. For example, when deciding between presumed consent and informed consent, they are mutually exclusive, which presumed consent can't tell you how to resolve. You'll inevitably include somebody, so you must aggregate interests. Third, people accept util as an appropriate way to judge the actions of decision makers. This commits government to see actions beneficial outcomes. Geno 8. The studies provide some evidence about outcome effects when people judge the ethicality of others' behavior. Outcomes lead people to see decisions in a different light. People see it as appropriate to allow decision to outcome to determine the decision's quality. Three impacts. A. It answers standard index since proves util is not counterintuitive or hard to calculate since most people already believe in it. B. It turns autonomy. And C. Since util best achieves the interests of people, even if people say they prefer something else, util best achieves that since that they try to serve with their decisions. C. Governments are non-functional absent utils and citizens will only support a government that best serves their interests as prerequisite, since the existence of a state is key to any other obligation, which means the AT precludes the NC. Finally, independent of consideration of the future happiness or life, death is ontologically the worst possible evil since it destroys the subject itself. Patterson 03. Death is evil not because it deprives us of a future, rather death in itself is evil because it ontologically destroys the subject. Independent of calculation about better or worse possible life, death is destructive of the type of entity we are. Any rejection of life cannot be warranted since it is an expression of the ultimate disvalue for the subject. Even if future states are relevant, death is worse harm since it denies the individual's ability to achieve any lifelines and opportunities. Thus, my standard is maximizing expected well-being. Contention 1 is Egypt. Egypt ought to presume consent for organ procurement from the deceased. Supply and demand in Egypt makes it an organ trafficking hub. Cultural biases make the plan inherent modified for offensive language. Hoyazin 417. 42,000 people in Egypt were in need of transplants. The solution was to transplant organs to deceased donors was ruled out because dead bodies were believed to be sacred. The WHO titled Egypt as a hub for organ trafficking. What to think about the multiplier effect these victims create when they convert to being brokers just for capturing the extra cash. The issue is who will supply these recipients. Humans in need of transplant will undoubtedly seek an illegal market. The huge gap between supply and demand will continue to be a point of contention. With the added pressure of political instability, Egypt provides a perfect setting for the trade. The app is the only way to solve trafficking in the illegal market. It's the best avenue and ensures organ matching and effective operations. Glacier 05, modified for offensive language. Presumed consent will produce a surplus of organs, establish equity in distribution, and end annualistic trade in organs trade. Presumed consent laws effectively increase supply in the country. Presumed consent has a higher rate of procurement rates. If the demand for organs met legally, people have less incentive to legally obtain organs, and the illegal market would diminish. In addition, presumed consent leads to improvements in tissue matching and a search to be more particular about which organs are selected. Presumed consent also ensures organs are fresher financially. Presumed consent lowers costs on the part of the government. In addition, will have fewer patients on dialysis. Next, the global market in organs is directly driven by lack of organs in the status quo. Criminal organizations perceive a gap and capitalize on it, resulting in mass exploitation. T-Garden 5. The supply of organs and cadaveric donors is limited. Criminal organizations have identified the gap between supply and demand, putting pressure on people in poverty to sell their organs. Poverty is made incentive for selling kidneys. Should the poor provide for the health of the rich? That is a tragedy for the poor to sell their bodies for the health of the rich. Trafficking in organs is demand-driven. Trafficking is exploitative and directly harms the poor. It is an unethical trade. T-Garden 5. Poverty leads young men and women to sell their body parts. The donor sells kidney for $2,000. The recipient pays $25,000. $250,000 surplus goes to organized crime. And a thriving underground market, the circulation of kidneys follow routes of capital from poor to Africans, from black and brown bodies to white ones. Organ trafficking persists because endless waitlist make organ commerce irresistible. The current paradigm presents the worst case scenario due to an organ trade black market exploits the socially invisible. The current course is unacceptable exploitation. Additionally, profitability of organ trafficking motivates violence and instability. In Northern Sinai, there are two warrants. Shoals 13. Smuggling constitutes a lucrative business. North Sinai constitutes a major route of trafficking. Africans who get to Egypt try to get to Israel from here, more African migrants who get to smuggled to Sinai have hostage to blackmail their families for money. The activities led to violence. First, violence arose from clash between smugglers and security forces. Second, the competition for larger shares in the smuggling business escalated. As reported from the traffickers are stealing organs. Incidents of infighting in the north of Sinai is a strong indicator of the negative effects of the competition for bigger shares. Instability causes the Middle East war. Hamas, Israel, and Egyptian wars prove. Byman and Ilinki 13. Instability in Sinai represents one of the most dangerous crises in the Middle East. The security vacuum allowed criminals and terrorists to expand their operations. Various groups use Sinai as a launching pad for attacks against Israel, large-scale smuggling, and such an illicit attack economy in both Gaza and Sinai, while helping Hamas boost its military capacity and political grip over Gaza. Increasing violence and instability in Sinai could complicate Egypt's already troubled transition. Prospects for Egyptian-Israeli clash also could be heightened, in which case the U.S. could find itself caught between its closest ally, Israel, and a vital partner on which regional stability depends. Unique characteristics make nuclear war uniquely likely in the Middle East to cause extinction. Russell 9. Strategic stability is undermined by non-state actions between certain relationships, makes bargaining on the table. Lack of communication framework to build trust is easy to manage scenarios under which a conflict could quickly escalate under regional antagonists. Would consider the use of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons would be a mistake. To believe the nuclear taboo can keep nuclear weapons from being used once a war starts, events would develop a momentum of their own. This also outweighs other scenarios. Miscalculus, especially likely in the Middle East. Capilla 09. More than any other strategic region of the globe, the Middle East represents a dubious prospect of being the most conflict-prone. Global armed conflicts can arise at any moment, not only because of regional rivalries, but for energy, security, strategic choke points, and nuclear and WMD proliferation. The Islamic jihadi impulses to proliferate are another complicating feature.
Okay, ready?
Yeah, here's the last page.
Thanks. Sorry for this out of order. But you say all ethical theories must begin from a source of value. Why is that true?
It is necessary to make the ethical project relevant to us.
Otherwise, what is the ethical project?
The question of asking why should I act ethically, or things like why do promises, rights,
okay.
responsibility.
So then we must start from value, but why does this value have to first start off from good?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So you say ethics must start from value to make the ethical project make sense. My argument is, why does it start off with what is the good?
The question is not necessarily the starting question. The starting question of ethics is not necessarily what is the, or the point is it should be what is the good, because all other moral questions depend upon why those things matter to us. So, for example, we can ask questions about,
isn't that just a descriptive claim? It just says
no.
The ethical theories in the status quo depend on that conception.
No.
Okay.
The point is that in order to make so, for example, if we ask questions about where does morality come from, we do not have any reason to engage in that undertaking in the first place if it does not somehow impact our lives.
Okay, so what is teleology?
Teleology is the study of value, what things are valuable and why.
Okay, that's fine. So let's go to the genoanalysis. So the genoanalysis seems to indicate that this is an accepted theory within the government, right?
Not within the government. It says that people believe util.
Okay, so
people
why
are
does
utilitarians.
Okay, so just because people are utilitarians, why is that entail prescriptive claims as to this is the ethical theory we should use?
Because the government should benefit the interests of its citizens, and if those interests are utilitarian.
Wait, but I thought this analysis indicated that governments use util, not necessarily that the citizens use util. So
no, that's exactly what I said. The geno evidence says that people are utilitarians.
Okay, does that account for every single person then?
Obviously, there's some people who do not make.
So what do we do about them?
But it's not about what do we do with them. The point is that
do we just care about the
we will inevitably have to make a decision on which ethical theory to choose. And since the majority,
so then that just seems to be the same as the trade-off argument. So so how is it different? Because
the trade-off. So the distinction is the trade-off argument says that. Says that any action will harm some people and help other people. The only way to resolve that conflict between rights is, instead of using a side constraint theory that says any action would be a violation, you should maximize or minimize the number of violations, or maximize the good.
So is there any theory stuff here?
No theory stuff.
Okay, so what is your interpretation of deceased?
What do you mean? What is my dead beings?
So what encompasses a dead being?
I guess the definition of death is something that has shifted in the past.
Okay,
but
so what will you defend in the definition of disease? Because you will.
Obviously, the plan would be extra topical if it also changed the definition of death.
I won't run T on whatever your definition is. I just want to know what you think deceased means.
Because your
plan defends deceased. I want to know.
I don't think it defends deceased. It defends taking or procuring organs from people who are deceased. Right. So it doesn't defend a legal definition of deceased. It just. There is a definition in the status quo, and it would be not topical to change that definition.
Okay, I want to know what is the definition that is in the status quo and that you will defend.
I think the definition is, in some countries, I think a few countries have adopted brainstem death, but in the status, so I think in the status quo, once
can
the
an
brainstem
animal
is
be
dead,
deceased?
Yes.
Okay, so will it be under your interpretation then?
I mean, possibly. Like, the plan text applies to
deceased,
consent.
right? I'm asking, can animals be deceased?
Animals can, in fact, be deceased, but I'm not sure if you would like me to defend, like, if you're going to read an animal's dissent.
I don't want you to defend something that I want. I just want to know what you will defend. You said animals are under deceased. You'll defend deceased. That means you'll defend animals, correct?
I don't think the evidence lines up with presuming consent with animals. I don't think it makes sense in the context of the topic, given that
okay, so
the
then
majority
what
of
do you
animals
defend
have
under deceased?
People.
Okay.
So, like, or human beings, not necessarily.
Okay, that's fine.
So the plan text applies to people. I don't think the definition of deceased would exclude animals because they are living beings that have ethical significance.
So why is the plan text? So you'll defend deceased, which
the definition of deceased includes both animals and humans,
right?
Because lots of things can be deceased. However, in the context of the plan, presumed consent applies to humans.
Why? Why would you create that distinction then in the plan text?
Because in the status quo, animals don't have legal standing.
Does the 1EC indicate that you'll defend? Where's the plan actually?
I think it's in one of the.
Okay. So you say that deceased would render animals and humans, but then you go on to say that in the plan text, not specifically, but the plan text says deceased. So
it says the word deceased, but there's obviously a context to that.
Okay.
So like you can also use like the word procurement also means like getting military supplies, but that's obviously not what organ procurement means. So like, there's a context to the plan text that is important.
Okay. Will you defend animals?
The plan text does not apply to organ procurement from animals because in the status quo they do not have the legal authority to give consent. And obviously it'd be extra topical to change the way consent is authorized now.
Is the internal to all your impacts organ shortage?
Yes.
Is there any other internally to any impacts that are relevant under the EC?
I mean, the first link card about trafficking, the tea garden evidence, says that there's a perception factor to it, so that could be an argument against counterclaims, for example.
Like, what does that mean?
So there is a perception that there's a shortage in organs, and that drives the market. I think that getting rid of that via the plan would solve those criminal organizations, but like potentially I can make the counterplan isn't perceived, so there's still trafficking, even if those.
Do you have evidence on when you see that says that the plan is perceived?
The Hoyazin and Glazer evidence say that Egypt is the trafficking hub in the status quo, so passing a presumed consent law would create a surplus of organs.
Okay. Do you advocate like a hard or soft opt-out system?
I'll defend. So I think most countries have a soft opt-out system. If you were going to read like theory or tea against
Will you defend soft opt-out?
Soft opt-out.
Okay. Cool. Stop.
55 maybe.
Yeah. Wait, actually, start again. I have to read. Okay, stop. 51 seconds. So we're just going to be framework, off case, AC.
So the app framework or
No, my framework. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, that's kind of confusing.
So two off AC.
Yeah. Can I use your stand? Thanks. Okay. Is everyone ready?
Yeah. Are you reading? If you're reading off your laptop, do you mind flashing it to me?
Mm-hmm. Oh, my computer's on 2%. But it's on here. Okay, just wait till I start it. Okay, so is everyone
Is it
ready?
titled Monumency for Origin?
No, it's titled Multiculturalism CB.
Right there.
Is everyone ready? Okay. I negate 1. We can never make objective claims in choosing between what justice is requires us choosing what justice isn't, since we don't have infinite knowledge. Our boundaries have the feature of never being objectively correct. Hagland. A key term is undecidability. One can never know what will happen. Promises make turns into threats, friendships into enemies, and so on. There's no opposition between undecidability of making decisions. One always is forced to make a decision, even though the consequences of that decision cannot be finally established. Any kind of decision, ethical, political, is violent, but it is necessary to make that decision. Without a vision of morals, there would be nothing at all. Every attempt to organize life in accordance with ethical prescriptions will have been marked by fundamentally duplicity. And since we can't possibly have an objective truth, we must create a system where subjective truths can be created. Since people's perspective differences, we must have a fundamental rule of respecting those differences. So top, a community is just a group of people held together by certain values, interests, and identity, defining political communities, but in a politically decided runs the problem of suppressing differences in a community is meant to designate a unified whole. In the sense then, the status of difference, particularly is autonomy, diminished differences, both within the groups are more than differences. They manifest a ray for the tension that renders the idea of organized harmony suspects, and so the only intersubjective obligation is to attempt to include viewpoints that render them politically efficacious. Imposing any other obligation would require an imposition of valid judgment under that political question. As such, the standard is making operative of the alternative theological discourse. And next off, AZ counterplan takes a just society ought to have a mandatory choice policy combined with a presumed refusal for anyone whose decision has not been officially recorded. The counterplan meets the framework Jacobs. Institutions have responsibility to concern themselves with heterogeneity. They are culturally millennials, which provides individuals with the means of expressing their cultural identity. The idea of choice by organizations is more ethically sound than the policy of silence. Norms of choice is more significant when the decision maker might be in deep disagreement with another because of the culture and the permanence of possible presumed consent by these peoples, subject peoples by imposing a dominant norm. Jacobs 2. A presumed consent policy by imposing the culture of belonging to life of or interpretation of organ understanding speech would ensure that the superiority over the other culture is under presumed under the soft version of the authority presumed consent, and thus makes it qualify reasonable effort to verify its presumption by searching designated voices behind the sentence. And only the counterplan is key and opt-in. The default is preferable. Jacobs 3. A default rule that disadvantages the stronger party procures the most vulnerable party to the opportunity to discuss and express our interests. If the default rule were in the interest of the better informed party, then the party would not approach such opportunities. It would be up to the weaker party to inform the default rule mechanism suggests that an opt-out for the state to provide a default rule that goes against the interests of the medical community would be implemented, and informed consent will marginalize individuals active participation style a great interest of the system operative with the presumed consent regime, since their side serves as the interest of the board, then cut the card there. And the counterplan solves the app empirical status quo, it doubles the average Thaler. There's more possibility that call them had interest under which people must indicate that their preference in the system has been used since 2006 and doesn't seem to have ruffled any features. The state now has a 6% to understand that is much higher than the national rate of 38. And B, multiple countries prove that increases organ shortage in the 100,000s. Carter. Mandatory laws of way of increasing the nation rate when Sweden introduced the law of the potential donor registry sold 600,000. Similarly, Denmark has increased by 100,000. Also, the 1AC never indicates how many organs are needed to actually solve the root cause of which is the internal link to all his impacts, which means that if as long as I have a substantial increase in than the status quo, that's a reason as to why the counterplan solves enough of that is reasonable, because you actually don't know how much it solves. Then go to the AZ framework. He says that all ethical theories must begin from a source of value, but one, this is not examining why all ethical theories must start from value. There might be some ethical theories that don't necessarily also. The hacking evidence is a specific form of how it doesn't start from the form of value, because value would be objective, so we can never assert value. We have to have a subjective conception, and those values have to be mutually constrained. Second, there's no reason as to why starting from value means that the value necessarily has to be good. The value can itself be bad. The fact that he doesn't warrant this is a reason as to why grab him this argument. Then on the first argument, he said that teleology comes first with this. Doesn't say why a world without Utah is bad. It just says that there would be no distinction between good and bad. Literally, it doesn't have any normative claim. It just says that we wouldn't be able to tell between this difference. But that just means that if teleology is true, that just triggers presumption, which is the reason as to why you negate. But second, the Hackman analysis is going to come first, because even if we have a conception of teleology, that conception of teleology is not necessarily going to be an objective conception, because it itself can differ. So our way of how we assert values necessarily through the NC framework. Then second. He says that teleology is the limit test, but this is impact justified because there's no justification as to why. Also, this doesn't outweigh because I can have equal because the only reason is he says that, well, then we can presume Utah, but you can also presume my framework then. Also, overview on the framework. One, an intersubjective ethical fecal communication is prerequisite to ethical necessity. It's a process of creating them. Also, it means it's not beneficial since people would follow the rules takes out your governmental obligation arguments. Jacobs. Communication results in the department of self-affirmation when agents face disagreement. Discussion should take place until the mutual assent of resolution is found, specifically in the legal context, because they contribute to the establishment of what the law will be. Citizens will comply with it. Afterwards, communication is the ground from which ethical values can emerge. So I put the card there. Second, even if I lose a framework debate, how tall function has a filter to your framework, since you apply a valid judgment, but those are arbitrary. And maximizing the good requires us knowing what the good is, i.e. looking at the people's discursive expression about the good. Do we act like this because we think it's good, but in reality it's just a subjective conception of the good? Go to its governmental obligation arguments. One, Hackman comes first, but whatever policymakers deem as good, they simultaneously deem other things as bad, and since they don't have infinite knowledge of policy and acted have the feature of being wrong. Second, policymakers have the duty to the people, which means that prerequisite to deciding what is beneficial, they first have to create the conditions of equality, equal discourse. Third, the Constitution is a cycle shape, so governments can be Utah. Fourth, this is an is-all balance. Just because the governments are Utah doesn't mean they have to be Utah. Five, this is impact justified. The only reason as to why we care about Utah in this sense is because we have to have a stable government, but there's no reason as to why that's true. Six, governments are politically biased in their policies because they have treaties, which means Utah wouldn't solve the trade-off argument. Seven, the resolution says just society, which doesn't have to be a government, so this isn't applicable. Eight, Waller presupposes that there, this argument presupposes that there are trade-offs between ethical theories. If I prove that I can solve the app, then this argument doesn't matter in this specific context. Then, overview on the third argument is that people can accept this, but the one entity indicates that people don't accept an objective claim because they have intersubjective claims also. Second, that this argument is false because it asserts an objective claim like everyone views Utah true. That is not true. Third, just because people assert it doesn't mean it's a good thing to do it because you can still marginalize the discourse. Also, so he just says people, this commits an is-all fallacy just because they are this way doesn't mean that implies any prescriptive obligation. Then he says that so anyways, you can there. So he says that pluralism can't solve trade-offs, but my argument is that pluralism is specifically prerequisite to doing any of the Utah stuff, which necessarily means you need the app. Then go to solvency. A meta-ethic analysis of the 13 countries concludes presumed consent does not increase the nation race, no at all 9. 8 databases for research to locate studies on presumed consent internet. Research were also performed the quality of these surveys was 13. Studies met the inclusion criteria compared to the data from other countries. These studies access the impact of the practice that presumed consent of organization. The conclusion presumed consent is unlikely to explain organization rate, competition of legislative availability of donors. Second, also he says that he can derive impacts because it's more plausible and people will perceive it, but that's never in the AC. He doesn't justify that the presumed consent is something that can perceive. It's only the internal link, which the NC does.
Alright, ready?
Yeah.
So the canon plan text is mandated choice. People who don't choose are presumed not to consent, correct?
Yeah, like for instance, someone who has language barriers or someone who's like out in the street, maybe they might not presume, so we presume refusal in those cases.
So the link to this, the link to the NC is the Jacob 2 evidence, which says it presumed consent imposes a dominant norm on
That's
people.
the link from the AC, right? I indicate that when we do presume, well, that choosing is the best option, but then we have to pick a lesser evil.
So when people choose, why is the norm of opt-in not being imposed on them?
Right, that's specifically the Jacobs 3 analysis, which indicates that this is a problem with most mandate choice counterplans. They don't necessarily indicate this, but my evidence indicates that the opt-in is preferable than the opt-out because we switch the boundaries of discourse from the dominant to like the marginalized, and so it indicates that.
What do you mean shift the boundaries of discourse?
So if we have to pick with one, then we should pick opt-in because it would mean that
so
we switch the power structure, for instance.
So the Jacob 3, the third piece of Jacob evidence says that it would do what's not in the interest of the medical community. Why does that so is the point to decrease the power
my
of the
my argument is that the people who would be excluded are like people with religious views or whatever, so they're not the dominant form of discourse. So my argument is that to link to the framework, it would be preferable.
Okay, so it makes sense to me why we should empower people who are not dominant, what doesn't make sense to me is why we should do the opposite of what the medical community wants.
Right, because
that's
the Hagelin framework, right? The community, we all have different perspectives. The problem is that the community, I mean, the medical field is the dominant perspective.
So your standard is about promoting alternative ideological discourses. This argument says do the opposite of what the medical community wants.
Yeah, because that is a subjective discourse. We have two conflicting discourses between the minority and the medical field.
How does that reduce their discourse? Just doing the opposite.
My argument is that because the evidence indicates that specifically when you switch it, it's more likely that these medical communities would be like outbursting and like complaining, and so we can have a discussion about it. But when you do it the other way, the minorities have less access to discussion.
The point is, get the medical community to complain so there can be a discussion.
No. The evidence is very specific as to why it would be harder for someone with weaker discourse in our society have any actual...
What is weaker discourse in
our
society?
That was bad language. I mean, someone who has like a weaker social position to actually have effective discourse in terms of like the problem and talking about it, right? So if the medical community is the dominant power, that means that they would have to talk to people to encourage them to donate because they want to solve the problem.
On the AT framework, you said something that if you can't, then you presume neg or something like that.
What?
Like I think you made a presumption argument on the AT.
I won't trigger presumption. It's just a reason to prefer my framework. Your argument indicates that.
I got the argument. That's fine. The AT response to util says that it's a prerequisite because it's key to empowerment. Why does that mean it's a prerequisite to util?
Sorry,
that was the Jacobs card you read on the case itself.
Oh, so I said that util is about creating norms. I say that a intersubjective framework is the only way we can actually create norms because it comes to a consensus over conflicting views of that norm, and so it's also more likely that people will follow it because they agreed upon it. So that's why intersubjective ethics would outweigh util in terms of like the calculability of something actually happening.
So the point of so I guess the NC doesn't say that. So is it about is the offense to the NC about the culture or norm that presumed consent imposes, or is it about violating people's choices that they would make?
Well, the AC violates the standard.
Right. So the question is the reason presumed consent bad because it would end up violating people's choices, i.e., people who do not want to donate organs would get their organs taken? Is that
no, it's not like an autonomy offense. My offense is that like you would impose a conception, right, a viewpoint of what the good is, and you would
why does mandated choice not do that? So that seems
that's specifically the Jacobs 1 and the Jacobs 2. Jacobs 1 says that the part of mandate choice is specifically good under the framework because we literally don't presume anything and allow people to choose what they believe is true. Then the Jacobs 3 argument says that if we have to pick a lesser evil, it would be opt-in because, for instance, if we presume opt-out, right, some minority to go and complain, the medical field probably won't even hear them. They wouldn't care about anything. But if it was the other way around, the medical field would have to persuade them to donate organs.
Status of the cattle pen.
Unconditional. The things you marked with an X you didn't read, right? Correct. Is that thing still on?
I think so.
Jerry, we need to make some adjustments for the second flight because people won't tell me about conflicts. So I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
I would like you to take Scott Wheeler's ballot
Okay.
in this very room.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you very much.
One minute left.
Do you want me to flash you everything?
Yeah.
Really?
That's if you want to, yeah, sure.
Actually, hold on. Can you do me one more favor, Jerry?
Sure.
Can you hang out here and try to eyeball Scott to not only grab his ballot, but then to tell him something else?
Yeah, sure.
And that would be, he is actually going to replace Andy to next door in 1240.
Gotcha.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
So the order is new off, AC top down, NC counterplan.
Where's the
Or counterplan NC. It's speech 1AR with the time, the 9:18, 2 p.m.
okay.
Thanks. Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Interpretation. If debaters read evidence whose text is modified with brackets, then for each affected card, the debater must say out loud that the evidence is bracketed and for what purpose, either immediately before or after reading the evidence. The violation in his Jacob card, he says, hospitals have a responsibility concerning themselves with it. He bracketed in the word heterogeneity. This means that he is modifying the text of the evidence. Even if it is a benign modification, it still affects the perception of that evidence, and still, my interpretation is still net beneficial because it means that you have to tell the judge why you are bracketing the evidence. The voter's evidence ethics, modifying the words of the authors, even if its subtle modification changes perceptions of the argument since it is taken at the author's word instead of the debaters, explaining that your evidence is modified is most honest since the judges who do not have access to your speech doc know that the words are sometimes your own. It also turns fairness. It allows them to represent their own words as the authors would play, increasing the validity of their own arguments inaccurately, skipping the contour cards. Your role as an educator mandates that you enforce academic rules against misconstruing people's position, just as a teacher would fail a paper that is plagiarized. You should not vote for someone who modified their evidence in dishonesty. Academic rules are key to enforcing a norm of honesty instead of applying this function to respectful and fair academic community, skipping the B point. This also justifies norming. You should vote for the interpretation that provides the best norm for debate. Also, for interpretation to create norms, violations must be verifiable and non-subjective. Otherwise, people can twist the interpretation of law practices that are actually abusive, and the interpretation would fail to create effective norms. No RVI for evidence ethics. There has to be some way to test the next evidence to ensure good norms without staking the round on it, since otherwise people would never challenge their evidence for fear of losing. Some people would get away with egregious evidence violations against people who don't just theory would get without risk of the RVI's keys, and out-of-round discussion is impossible. Second, and incentivize to read unclear evidence, debate evidence ethics, and then clarify their evidence in the next speech, which is even worse for debate, so no RVIs. Now, the F. Starting with the framework. Extending the argument to evidence, all values inevitably collapse to util because they are the only way to make the ethical project relevant to us. This means that for example, the process of deliberation would collapse into util because the ultimate conclusion of that process would be that the reason we value things in the first place is because they have some effect on our well-being. Now, all his answers miss the point. The first two arguments are that subjective morality is here, that some theories might not. Missing the point. The argument is that all values depend on pain and pleasure because otherwise they would not be useful to us. For example, if the distinction between lying and telling the truth is only relevant if it is possible for us to somehow experience that value which collapses to util. He says, what if the value is bad? Not relevant. The point is that you feel pain as something bad and pleasure as something good. He says doesn't warrant util. Yes, it does. Pain is good, or pain is bad, and more pain is worse. So you should prevent pain. He says trigger presumption. He said he won't go for that. And also the act doesn't collapse to presumption because it allows us to resolve subjectivity. Even if objective ethics is impossible in some cases, we can recognize that everybody has a subjective value to their own life, which means that you should preserve their ability to recognize that value, which answers this Habermas evidence as well as a cross-application of the Jacob evidence on the app. Finally, he says that you should assert your value subjectively. That is not not a response. The point is that yes, you can in fact assert your values subjectively, but everybody has their own values, and you need to be alive to experience any of that, which means the AT framework is a prerequisite. All the terms why governments should not use util is an answer to the wrong piece of evidence, and none of these arguments apply. They've also dropped the Patterson evidence, which says that death destroys the type of being that you are, which means it precludes the NC. Even if the NC is true, you need to be alive in order to experience, to engage in discourse in the first place. So the absence of prerequisite. Now the contention: the meta-analysis argument is not actually offense. It just says that sometimes some studies can conclude all causes, but the majority of studies can conclude the other way, just defense. But he has conceded that the majority of studies go affirmative. Second, he's dropped the Glaser evidence. The surplus of ordinance is empirically proven, and empirical evidence from multiple countries proves it. We'll read more evidence on this issue. Presumed consent solves chronic organ shortages. Is also in medicine. Retaliate 09. 5 before and after study drops in 3 countries all report an increase in donation in the form of best quality between country comparisons. Presumed consent was associated with an increased donation of 25 to 30%, which answers this argument. Now the counterplan. Perfect both. There's no net benefit. It shields a link because it means that people would decide. It means people would decide in favor of organ transplant. If people made a choice, and they would not actually be exploited, which answers Jacob Bourdieu and 3 evidence. Also, even if the opt-in default is good, all things presuppose some kind of default, which means that they all impose some culture. The question is which culture helps people believe util is the only way to resolve that. Also, the F turns the NC because trafficking means that you're not able to participate in discourse at all. It's the worst form of exclusion. Even if your culture is imposed on you, if you're dead, poor, or exploited, it's the worst form of exclusion. Also, none of these empirics have actual solvency. Mandatory choice is not mutually exclusive.
Alright. How much time do I have left?
51.
51. Alright. Do you have one of those timers that has like exactly?
Yeah.
Okay, starting. Okay. Can I use this?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So, order's going to be theory, NC, AC. Just set up. Okay. Thanks. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. Easy counterinterpretation. Debaters must say out loud that the evidence is bracketed if it is an issue that is not grammatical and BIB. I specifically said heterogeneity because the author specifically said heterogeneity at the beginning of the sentence, but it wouldn't make grammatically sense the way I cut it, and that solves all of his abuse because his abuse is plagiarism, but I don't necessarily plagiarize because that is exactly what the author is saying. I just made it so towards where it's the end. If you think that it's not reasonable, then call for the card and see if it actually is grammatically or not grammatically correct. Also this takes out his argument that I phrase whatever the author is saying, and I make it look like he's saying this because my interpretation solves back because it is exactly what the author is saying. He's specifically just saying this. I'm just putting the exact same word at the end of the sentence so it can make grammatical sense. If really you don't think it's grammatically, then you can call for the card. Otherwise, this grammatical counterinterpretation solves 100%. There's no abuse because I don't shape or plagiarize anybody. Then let's go to the NC. Well, okay. His first argument is a permutation debate, but that is not going to be possible in the world where he's conceded the Jacobs 2 analysis, which indicates that the perm is impossible. Pursuit consent violates people's subjective viewpoints by imposing a dominant norm, a norm of the culture of transportation, and donor recipients would assure superiority over the other cultures. His second argument is that means that it's not unique because of default, because we still would have to default in good, and we would have to look at the better good. But that is exactly what the counterplan is doing. The counterplan indicates that we still have to have a lesser evil, and the Jacobs 3 analysis contextualizes that if we had to choose between opt-in and opt-out, it would be opt-in. Extending Jacob's 3 analysis takes out this argument. Only the counterplan is key, and the opt-in is preferable because it would switch the power discourse into the dominant. The dominant one would not be the one who gets what they want. That means that they specifically have to go talk to the people, have to go talk to the minorities, and tell them that they should donate organs. Rather, if it was the other way around, the minorities would have to go to the medical field, which is a power structure, and they would probably not listen to them, which means that we effectively don't get enough discourse. That is a takeout to his argument. Then he says that the app turns the counterplan, but the problem is that the app only turns the counterplan in a world where he's winning the framework debate. If I win the framework debate, then the app doesn't turn the counterplan because it doesn't matter at all. So let's go to the AC. The problem is that he's extending a lot of the arguments that he is conceding the overview analysis extend the second argument. Even if I lose the framework debate, how top functions as a filter to your framework since you apply a value judgment, but those are arbitrary, so maximizing the good requires us knowing what the good is, i.e. looking at people's discursive expressions about the good, doing the app analysis because we think that it is good, but in reality it is a subjective conception of the good. There's perfect link evidence. The first argument that he extends is that all values are paid and pleasure, but the problem is that he says all values, you cannot make an objective claim in a world where you're conceding the Hagelin analysis that indicates that when we make those judgments, those are going to be subjective because we can never be sure because we have to pick what justice is in as well. So we have to pick between values, and those are we don't have infinite knowledge, so we don't necessarily know that is right, which means that is perfect link evidence. Also, he makes a new framework argument that outweighs. He says that life comes first, but the problem is that life coming first is a value judgment, and that necessarily entails that we care about life, but that is itself an objective claim. So you still have to default to my framework. Additionally, even if life comes first, he is conceding that Jacob's 1 analysis indicates that an intersubjective ethical but equal communication is prerequisite to ethical norms, since it is the process of creating them, and also means it's not beneficial since people would follow the rules, which means that if life does come first, the Jacob analysis indicates that people would actually follow this rule and would be in line with it, which means that it doesn't actually create backlash. So that is the reason as to why I'm winning the framework debate. He is conceding too much of the overview analysis. So, and then let's go back to the, okay. So he says that it's just defense, the meta study, but the problem is that even if you think that I'm losing the framework debate and my internal links into the framework debate are really bad, go to the counterplan again. The problem is that even if I'm going to be losing the framework debate, I can still win off of a util framework. He is conceding a couple of key, points, which is okay, that the counterplan solves the app, extend the Thaler analysis. Empirical studies prove that it doubles the average because in Illinois it went from 38% to 60%. Then extend the B point, which the B point indicates that multiple countries prove it increases organs in the 100,000s. That's the Carter analysis, which means that I necessarily solve for the app. Also because I solve the app, that means that you can still any risk of a disad is a reason as to why you prefer. Extend my argument that the AC doesn't indicate how much organs we actually need. His internal link is that we need organs to solve for the black market. The problem is he doesn't tell us how many organs we actually need. As long as I create an increase, that is a reason as to why I solve enough of the app. That is a completely conceded argument. So that means that the app has no unique impact. If there's any risk of the AC happening, if there's any risk that the AC links into the disad of the counterplan, i.e. it disrespects a dominant norm, then that's a reason as to why the counterplan is bad. I can co-opt all his offense. The only argument on the counterplan that's relevant, that's not the permutation or the better default rule, is that the app turns the NC, but that's not possible in a world where the NC solves the app because there's nothing to turn. So let's do more framework debate on the AC. So he is not necessarily weighing between any of these framework arguments. So go to the trade-off argument. So extend that Hagelin comes with whatever policymakers deem as good. They simultaneously deem other things as bad. Since they don't have infinite knowledge of policies and that could have the feature of being wrong. Under his framework debate, I would say that this was all of the arguments because it indicates that that's the only way we can actually pass policies. Which means that if it's true that that's the only way we can pass policies, then the NC controls the internal link to that. He's not doing any weighing. Really quick, here's how the framework debate goes. He has 3 arguments on the NC. The only one that actually matters is the app turns the NC. If I prove that the counterplan already solves the entirety of the app, there's no turn under it, which means that because I solve the entirety of the app, there's only a risk of a disad, i.e. the disad is that he imposes a dominant culture. That's a net benefit to the counterplan. Even if I don't win on the discourse framework, I still win off of util.
Okay, can I turn?
Yeah.
1 minute left.
The order is the new 1AR off.
The new off?
Yeah, the one I read, the 1AR. Not like a third new off.
That's it?
So what is it?
It's just the 1AR position. The brackets shell.
Okay.
Is everyone good? The question of this debate is one of norming. Whose interpretation is better for debate? He has conceded that evidence ethics is a question of who has the better norm. Extend the voter that evidence ethics is key to honesty. It's a question of norming since judges are educators who should provide good educational norms for the activity. The voter section has all been conceded. They also extend the argument under that says it justifies norming because the question is whose interpretation is better for debate and makes debate a more honest and open activity. This means that you compare the interpretation versus the counter-interpretation. Remember, he does not have an I-mean argument because he does in fact violate my interpretation. Every time you modify a piece of evidence, you should be forced to notify the judge. For example, in the 1AC, I took out the word black market because I think it's offensive, and I said each time I read an evidence that was modified for offensiveness or to modify to change offensive language. That notifies the judge that I'm manipulating the author's words, and it's better because it means the judge knows what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Now, evidence ethics extend the abuse story. Evidence ethics modifies the words because it changes the perception of the arguments. Even if it is a relatively benign change, it still changes the way the judges perceive that argument. For example, you can play with the way the author uses their language in order to bolster the language in your favor, which would also be considered an issue of grammar and would meet his counter-interpretation, which is a dissat to his counter-interpretation. For example, you could say like black market is ungrammatical and modify your interpretation to avoid K-links. You could also pretend something is grammatical, or under his interpretation, you can convince yourself that something is grammatical and do something that is towing the line. That is the problem with this counter-interpretation, and this argument was preempted specifically in the 1AR. I slowed down for this part. You should reject counter-interpretations that have unclear norms because you don't know when you meet that interpretation. If it's a question of norming, then we need norms that draw lines in the sand, i.e. ones that you know that you can meet and are not open to interpretation. Grammar is a very good example of a norm that you do not know what you meet, whether you meet it or not, because, for example, you can line it down differently or not use the brackets in order to say the same purpose of grammar. Also, you do not meet your counter-interpretation because because you could have lined it down differently. The original text was grammatical, which means it was not in fact lined down for grammar, it was lined down for efficiency. His last argument here is that abuse is about plagiarism, which was not, that is the mischaracterization of the abuse story. The abuse was that you modify the words and that can change the perception of the way the judges and your opponents perceive the argument, which is a dissent to your counter-interpretation. Finally, there's no offense for his counter-inter. He's conceded it's a question of norming. There's no reason his norm is better than mine. You should prefer a norm that holds you to a high standard. His norm is open to misinterpretation and it's unclear, which creates a line drawing problem. Allowing some brackets and not others creates an issue of subjectivity since it's unclear whether you're modifying the author's intent or changing it for grammar or for some other purpose. Notifying the judge is the best norm because it holds you to a high ethical standard and ensures that the community becomes more honest and open, which links to the voter. So here's how you value this shell. He's considered it's a question of norming, which means he needs offense, which basically means he loses because he does not have offense on the theory debate. Also, it's a question of whose norm is better. Mine holds you to a higher standard than his does, which leads to more openness and more honesty. Even if his interpretation solves most of the abuse, or even if you do not think even if you thought it's benign in this case, that is not the issue. It's a question of norms. Vote for the better norm.